I never expected a 6-inch dispute to spiral into full-on neighborhood warfare, but here we are. It all started when I got a knock on the door one Saturday morning. I opened it to find my neighbor, Greg, standing there with a tape measure in one hand and a smug expression on his face. Greg had moved in about a year ago and immediately began treating our cul-de-sac like his personal fiefdom. He'd complained about people leaving trash bins out too long, parked too close to his mailbox, and even once asked the guy across the street to tone down his garden gnome collection. I braced myself. "Hey," he said, glancing past me at my side yard. "We need to talk about your fence." "My fence?" I repeated. "Yeah, I just measured. Looks like it's about 6 inches over the property line on my side. I think it needs to be moved." I blinked. 6 inches? "Greg, that fence has been there since I bought the house 7 years ago." He shrugged. "That may be true, but it's still on my land now. I just had a survey done. I'll send you a copy. You'll need to move it. HOA says it's your responsibility." I couldn't believe it. The fence wasn't new, neither was the property line, but Greg was insistent, and within a few days, I received a formal complaint from the HOA, citing unauthorized encroachment based on a recent survey Greg submitted. It was laughable, but now it was becoming official. I appealed, of course. I asked for time to verify the boundary myself, but Greg had pulled the classic HOA power move: act fast, act confident, and bury people in paperwork. He even started pointing it out to neighbors like it was a scandal. "You'd think someone who's lived here this long would know where their own yard ends," I overheard him say to a jogger one morning. What bothered me wasn't just the arrogance, it was the smirk. Greg wasn't just trying to reclaim 6 inches of grass. He was trying to make a point, so I started digging. I pulled up the original property plat from the county website. Then I requested the documentation Greg submitted to the HOA. His survey looked official, but I noticed something strange. The surveying company he used, it was registered in another state, and the digital signature was blurred, almost like it had been copied or compressed too many times. That raised a red flag. I went to the local zoning office and requested a copy of the last official survey on both properties. The clerk helped me dig through the records, and after about an hour, she found it. An official survey done 4 years ago when the previous owner of Greg's property refinanced their mortgage. According to that survey, the fence was exactly where it should be, so either Greg's survey was wrong, or he was deliberately fudging the numbers. But then something even more interesting happened. While I was flipping through Greg's plat map, I noticed something odd on the backside of his yard. His in-ground pool, the fancy one he bragged about at every block party, looked a little too close to the boundary. The original builder's plan said it was 5 feet from the line, but on Greg's newer survey, it was shown a few feet further back, right on the edge. Curious, I decided to take some photos from my upstairs window that overlooked the yard. Then I paced out the space from my own fence to where his pool began. The numbers didn't add up. I pulled out a string line and staked out the official boundary based on the coordinates from the county survey. That's when I realized Greg's pool wasn't just close to the property line, it was on my land. At least 2 feet of concrete deck, including the corner where he'd installed a built-in grill and lounge area, crossed into my property. I felt my pulse spike. Greg had tried to nail me for 6 inches of fence. Meanwhile, his entire entertainment setup, the pride of his backyard, was illegally built on my land. The irony was delicious. But I didn't rush into action. I wanted this to be clean, undeniable, and absolutely devastating. I documented everything. Measurements, photos, public records. I even hired a licensed local surveyor to verify it all, someone with a reputation in the county for being meticulous and thorough. When the final report came back, I had a legal document stating that Greg's pool was encroaching 2.3 feet onto my property. The best part? Since the deck was cemented in and the grill setup was attached to it, he couldn't just move it. At that point, I could have marched right over and thrown the report in his face. But I had a better idea. It was time for Greg to find out what happens when you start a petty war over 6 inches. Now that I had the survey in hand, proving Greg's pool was illegally built on my property, I knew I had the upper hand. But I wasn't going to blow it all on a single confrontation. Greg had no idea what was coming. He was too busy acting like he'd already won. A few days after I received the survey results, I saw him in his backyard hosting a barbecue. Music, drinks, people splashing around in the pool, including on the exact part that technically belonged to me. It was surreal. I stood upstairs watching the whole thing unfold, knowing that every plate of ribs he flipped on that built-in grill was cooked on my land. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I began building a case, not for confrontation, but for options: legal, financial, and public. I contacted a local real estate attorney, someone who specialized in property disputes. I walked him through the situation, showed him the original property plat, Greg's questionable survey, and the new survey I'd commissioned. He took one look at the measurements and said, "Oh yeah, that pool's trespassing. What are my options?" I asked. He gave me 3. Option 1, I could file an official cease and desist notice and demand the removal of the encroaching structure. Option 2, I could pursue compensation for the use of my land, what's known as a license agreement, essentially charging rent for his encroachment. Option 3, I could sell him the sliver of land at whatever price I set, assuming I wanted to be generous. But there was also a 4th unspoken option: use the information as leverage. I didn't want to be cruel. I wanted to be smart. Greg had embarrassed me in front of the HOA, tried to force me to move a perfectly legal fence, and acted like I was the problem. But if I played this right, I could flip everything on him, legally and publicly, and expose him for the fraud he really was. First, I went back to the HOA. I filed a counter-complaint, this time with my survey documents, plus photos and legal notes from the attorney. I didn't even mention the pool yet. I just asked them to dismiss the original complaint regarding my fence and review the legitimacy of Greg's survey. They were surprisingly responsive. Apparently, other neighbors had started to grow tired of Greg's self-righteous behavior too. His name came up more than once in recent board meetings. A week later, I received a letter. The HOA had dismissed the complaint against me and strongly advised that no further action be taken until an independent surveyor, one hired by the HOA itself, could verify boundary lines. That was my green light. The HOA sent someone out within days. I stayed quiet, respectful, even offered the surveyor water while he worked. Greg, on the other hand, stormed out of his house when he saw the guy measuring near his pool. "What's this about?" I heard him bark. "Just a routine boundary check," the surveyor replied flatly. Greg folded his arms, watching with a scowl. He knew something was off, but he still didn't know the full scope. Then came the twist. That weekend, I received a call from the HOA president. "Hey," she said, "this might be out of line, but did you know your neighbor's pool is on your property?" I played dumb. "Really?" The surveyor told us. "It's not just the pool, it's the whole concrete apron around it, nearly 2 feet. "Wow," I said, trying not to laugh. "That's interesting." She hesitated. "What do you want to do about it?" That's when I knew. The HOA wasn't siding with Greg anymore. The guy who used to weaponize the rulebook was now under scrutiny himself. I told her I wanted to handle things privately first. She respected that, and assured me that if I needed their backing, I had it. And then, it was time. I printed a copy of the survey, highlighted the encroachment zone, added a copy of my attorney's letter outlining legal remedies for trespassing structures. I slid it all into a bright red folder and waited until Greg was in his driveway cleaning out his SUV. I walked over casually and said, "Hey, you got a second?" He turned and gave me the usual tight-lipped smile. "Sure. What's up?" I handed him the folder. "What's this?" "Just a little something I've been working on. Since we're talking about property lines." He opened it and started flipping through. His face drained of color around page 2. Wait, this isn't right. It's a licensed local surveyor," I said. "Verified against county records. Your pool is on my property." He shook his head. "That's not possible." "It is, and now the HOA knows it too." Greg looked up, eyes darting. "You're not seriously going to force you to tear it all out?" "Maybe, but I haven't decided yet." He stood there speechless. I turned and walked back to my house before he could argue. The man who made a scene over 6 inches was now panicking over 6 feet, and that was just the beginning. After I handed Greg that reggae and folder, something in the neighborhood shifted. He wasn't as loud anymore. No more smirking when we passed each other at the mailbox. No more puffed-up walks across his yard, pretending to measure my fence with a tape measure in full view of the HOA cameras. Suddenly, he was quiet, careful. It was like watching a predator realize it had wandered into someone else's trap. I gave him a full week to respond, apologize, maybe even offer a solution. But nothing came. No knock at my door, no note, no message through the HOA, just silence. So I went back to my lawyer. We drafted a formal demand letter, not aggressive, just factual. It cited the property survey, stated clearly that Greg's pool and surrounding deck encroached by roughly 22 inches into my property, and gave him two options. Option 1, remove the encroaching portion of the structure within 60 days. Option 2, pay me fair market value for the land plus damages, based on an appraisal and calculated usage fees over the last 5 years. We also attached a notice of intent to sue, just in case he thought I was bluffing. I had it hand-delivered. The very next morning, Greg rang my doorbell for the first time since this whole thing began. I opened it to find him holding the letter in one hand and visibly sweating. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. Sure. He didn't waste time. "This whole thing's gotten out of control. Look, I didn't know about the pool thing. The contractor must have misread the lines. You went after my fence," I reminded him. "Filed a complaint. Lied to the HOA about your survey. Humiliated me. I thought I was right," he said. Then added, "Look, we're neighbors. We should figure this out without lawyers." I paused. "All right," I said. "Make me an offer." Greg blinked. "What? You want to avoid legal trouble? Make me an offer. You're using my land. What's that worth to you?" He started doing the math out loud. Square footage, landscaping costs, demolition costs, trying to convince me that a few $1,000s would make this go away. But I wasn't interested in a quick payout. "You don't understand," I said. "This isn't about money. This is about respect." His eyes narrowed. "So what? You want to take me to court?" "No, I want you to fix what you broke. You started a war over 6 inches. Now you're standing in my yard asking for peace." He didn't respond, just stood there with his jaw clenched. I let him stew for a few days. Then I made my next move, and this one, I'll admit, was a little strategic. I called the county building inspector. I filed an anonymous complaint suggesting that Greg's pool might not be fully permitted, and that a recent property survey revealed a boundary issue that might affect public safety and local code compliance. Less than a week later, a county truck pulled up outside his house. I watched from behind my blinds as the inspector knocked on Greg's door, clipboard in hand. They walked the perimeter, took measurements, photos, even looked over the fence into my yard. Greg looked like a man sweating through every layer of denial he'd been wearing. That same evening, I got a call from Greg. "I need to talk," he said. I met him on the sidewalk between our houses. "They're saying the pool might need to be partially demolished unless I can prove it's not on your land." I nodded. "It is on my land. I can't afford to tear it out," he said, voice cracking a little. I shrugged. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before coming after me." He looked down, defeated. That was the moment I knew I had him. Not just ally, but morally, he'd been humbled. Finally, "Here's what I'm willing to offer," I said. "You sign a license agreement to rent the land annually. At my rate, you publicly retract your complaint to the HOA, and you agree in writing never to file another complaint against me unless it involves a criminal matter." He looked up, stunned. "That's it? Think of it as a peace treaty," I said. "But if you break it, I go nuclear. Court, news, county, everything." Greg hesitated. Then he nodded. A week later, we signed the agreement. I charged him $4,000 a year to rent my land under his pool. I took that money and finally upgraded my backyard. Patio, fire pit, new fencing. The irony was perfect. He paid for my improvements. And the best part? Every time Greg hosts a party, every time he hears the splash of someone jumping into his pool, he knows he's paying me for it. The man who tried to force me to move my fence now rents my dirt at a premium. You'd think it would have ended there. The contract signed, money changing hands. Greg thoroughly humbled. But no, Greg was the kind of guy who didn't like to lose, even when he clearly had. For the next couple of months, he became passive-aggressive in all the classic neighborly ways. He started mowing right up to my fence line, sometimes even leaning his mower's wheels into my side. His floodlights would mysteriously angle toward my bedroom windows. The noise from his pool parties, a little louder, but I didn't take the bait. Why would I? I had the moral high ground, and more importantly, I had leverage. See, the contract we signed included a clause, one I'd specifically requested after consulting with my lawyer. It stated that any violation of our agreement, including harassment or nuisance behavior tied to the original complaint, would nullify the rental arrangement and allow me to seek removal of the encroachment. So while Greg was busy acting like a sulking teenager, I was documenting everything. Phone videos, time-stamped logs, photos of his lawnmower scraping my side, even audio recordings of his late-night parties blasting music into the early hours. I submitted a couple of anonymous complaints to the HOA, just enough to start a paper trail. 3 months later, I had enough. I sent him a formal notice through my attorney. You are in violation of Clause 7B of our license agreement. Unless you remedy these violations within 10 days and agree to additional behavioral conditions, we will pursue full enforcement of land recovery, including removal of the encroaching pool deck. This time, Greg didn't ring my doorbell. He didn't send a message. He lawyered up, but that didn't help him. The contract was airtight. The behavior was documented. And that's when the final twist came. Not from me, but from the county inspector who'd visited before. Turns out, once a structure is flagged for potential code violations and sits under legal dispute, it can't be refinanced, insured, or even sold without full resolution. Greg had planned to list his house in the spring. Now he couldn't, not without my signature. He was trapped. So what did he do? He gave in, fully. He agreed to not only pay for another year's rental in advance, $5,000 this time, but also signed a perpetual easement agreement. That meant the pool encroachment was now officially, legally tied to my ownership, and every future buyer of his house would have to honor the terms. That's right. He basically added value to my property at the cost of his own, all because he couldn't admit he was wrong over a 6-inch fence line. And the cherry on top? The HOA finally dropped all mentions of my original fence violation from their records after I forwarded my full property survey and Greg's public retraction. I framed the HOA's apology letter and hung it in my garage. These days, Greg and Haz. I don't talk much. He keeps to himself. No more tape measures, no more dirty looks. And every time I sit on my new patio, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight sparkle off the edge of his pool, the edge that sits neatly over my land, I smile, because 6 inches cost him tens of thousands and bought me the most satisfying win of my life. All legal, all documented, and all because one man tried to push my fence back without realizing I'd been pushed too far.